Good morning.
Hello, how are you doing?
Hey, good.
I don't see you yet.
There, finally got up and you're up and running.
Boy, that took a long time. Must be a Windows and not a Mac. They have all those updates, huh?
It is. It was a Windows.
Oh
It was
yeah.
a Windows update, and I just shut it down and restarted.
Okay.
So
All right. Well, hello, Eric. How are you doing?
he says, "Hello, Mom." He's like shaking his head. He says, "I'm good."
Good. I'm so glad. Well, you know what? I want to talk about something that's always bothered me a lot, and a blog member brought it up. The plight of our spiritual contract with Native Americans. I mean, I thought that was just such a shameful part in our history. I have some Cherokee blood in me myself, but I just feel like what we did was horrible. What's that all about?
He says, and I can relate. I have a lot of Cherokee in my family too as well. Um, Eric says he says, oh, okay, there's a couple angles he wants to look at this. First of all, he says, it depends on what perspective you take as far as calling it like what we did was terrible. Um, he says, it depends on what perspective you take, and even putting that judgment on it blocks your view, he says, and blocks your ability to see the purpose behind it. He says, no matter what we're talking about, Mom, he says, we're always looking for the purpose and the growth from it, the evolution from it. So he says, from your perspective, which many take, he says, it's he says we consider it horrible for a few reasons because we're looking from a human standpoint, which is thinking from the mind instead of the heart. He says when we, it's sort of like what he's showing is us going in and taking over, believing that this is a very simple, and we still live this way, believing that our views, our thoughts, our actions are right and that they take priority. It was very aggressive. It was, he's showing, he's talking about being blocked by, like the aggressive approach that we took. He says it was blocked by ego. There was, and oh, this might ruffle a couple feathers. He says there was at that time and still is a huge lack of um, like openness to other cultures, other perspectives, and value and appreciation, Mom. He says we are becoming to such a minute level, all the way down to the level of self. Not even culture anymore, Mom. We're coming down to the level of self, that self is right.
Mm-hmm.
So he says it depends on how you look at it. You can look at it, from a community, from a culture standpoint, and then, from mankind's standpoint. But we're coming down all the way to the level of the individual, where the individual just believes in its own ego, and that its own ego is right, accurate, and prioritized over others' beliefs. So what he says here, the whole purpose is to slow down, and first you have to separate from ego, though. He's like, too many people. He's like, okay. He says that it's almost, this is tough to translate. He says it's almost like a lost cause, Mom. He says you have to get people to separate from their ego first. And that is hard because a lot of people don't even truly understand what ego really is.
Yeah.
Ego isn't just an inflated sense of self, Mom. He says, so if we can get people first to understand where they're acting in that, then they can separate from it enough to be open-minded and respectful. He says it doesn't matter what cultural traditions you practice. If you, he kind of like laughs. He has such a, his vibration is so simple. It feels, this might sound strange, but his vibration feels very thin,
Mm-hmm.
and he's taking a very simple approach.
Okay.
Um, And he says it doesn't matter what cultural traditions you practice. Mom, he says, there's no right and wrong. It's different eyes looking for the same thing.
Mm.
So for us to go in and take over and to push our beliefs and even do different things to the land, he says, was very um, ego driven, but it was also driven in fear. He says it was also very fear based. Um, he says, but this kind of stuff happens all over the world. It's not
Sure.
just with Native Americans. He says it happens all over the world when one becomes so clouded with their ego that they believe that their beliefs, their traditions, their practices, whatever, are right or
Like the
um,
jihadis, for example. Like the jihadis.
he's
Yeah.
just shaking his head. Yes, he says. Um, Man, his approach today is so somber. He says, "Mom, as long as we believe, if we, as long as we act in ego and believe that our beliefs are right or best, we'll never know world peace."
Oh
He
no.
says, if you can't truly operate in love and respect another because they're different and respect them for their differences and coexist with that,
Hmm.
we'll never truly know what world peace is in the
Yeah.
earthly realm anyway.
What about
There's a big difference.
yeah? What about the fear? You said it was fear based. Where? What was the fear about?
He says he couples that, he crosses his fingers, so he couples the fear with dominance. It's like, or more so, he changed that word to territorial. Like, kind of like I have to mark my territory, I have to own. So it's the actions were out of fear, um, needing needing to have the territory, needing to take over. He
Okay.
says anytime um, he says it doesn't matter who you are. Anytime you see that drive or see that need um, to claim a space or dominate a space, own it, it's fear driven, Mom, and it's an illusion to actually own land or take over a people.
Okay.
Um, he says it all goes back to the ego. It's
Okay.
falsely fulfilling.
So
Um,
it was a contract basically for us to learn how to separate from our egos. Is that what our contract with the Native Americans was?
he says as a people, and he keeps
As
saying
a
like as a
people.
people, like as a mankind, not not at the individual level,
Okay. Yeah.
but so there's a big difference. He says, but again, whether it's at the individual level or the level of a group of people, he says owning space, taking over, or having ownership is just an illusion, Mom.
Oh, of course. Of course. Well,
Really.
what can we do about that? I mean, they have increased suicides, alcoholism. I mean, what can we do for the Native Americans now? And why is that all happening? Why are they having? Why are they struggling so? Answer that one first, and then what can we do about it? But just briefly.
Yeah. He's showing when you said why, why is all of this happening? He
Yeah.
repeated his own words and said, they feel as though it's a lost cause because he says, Mom, they operate from the heart space more than most, and when you are completely, or at least more aligned with that heart space, that sacredness,
Mm-hmm.
and all that is sacred to you, um, there's not a sense of ownership there, but just rather an understanding of what's sacred. So to them, he says, they feel that we're so far gone from um, the sight of that, of seeing and knowing what is sacred and keeping anything sacred.
Mm.
They see us as very wasteful, like people of waste and convenience, like
Mm-hmm.
very surface level. So it's either they exist as they are in their cultural without disruption,
Mm-hmm.
or they don't want to exist
Okay.
because they almost feel like it's impossible to
Well,
mesh.
what can we do? practically, in a practical sense?
He's showing, he's using image to speak, and he's showing like us nurturing their beliefs. It's very easy, Mom. It's very simple. He says keeping an open heart and an open mind, and showing them that that there's a couple things that he wants to address here, but he says showing them that their ways are respected.
Hmm.
Um, but it's hard, Mom. He says because they live a slower lifestyle than we do, so it's really hard to find a common ground.
Right.
Um, Especially when you have two types of people,
Yeah.
as the culture that are like this. He says they're
Yeah.
both hard-headed, and to let down the traditions, Mom. The traditions get in the way. He says, and to on both sides, and to let the traditions sort of fall away and come to a common ground as I'm a human, you're a human. Let's start over.
Mm.
Um, it's really hard because it's embedded. It's so thick on both sides.
Yeah.
The conditions in which the peoples were raised, he says. So he says, but it has to be mutual. This is interesting. Um, he says it has to be mutual in that if, us nurturing their ways to show them that we respect them, but they have to do the same.
Yeah.
I don't have a whole lot of knowledge on this. Like most things, I live in a bubble, but he's showing that they're not cooperative either. So
Okay.
it's very like there's no communication right now. There's no will. There's no want to, so to speak.
Well, maybe
Um,
maybe all we can do in a practical sense is send them healing energy, white light, you know?
he says sometimes, Mom, um, sometimes even that. He says instead of thinking about sending them healing, um, think about sending the cause healing,
Oh.
like the collective awareness of it, like
Mm.
the
Okay.
the collect. Because if we constantly sit around and think it's a horrible situation, it's a horrible, he says we're putting that energy
Yeah.
on the
Into it. Yeah.
situation.
All
So
right. So
think of
send
it,
light to the situation.
yeah, Mom. He
Okay.
says the collectiveness.
That sounds great. Well, anything else you want to say before we go on to our next topic?
He's just talking to everybody that would be watching, and he says, he's like shaking his finger. He says, remember, um, your way isn't the wrong way. Your way isn't the right way. Your way is just your way.
That's right.
So he's like asking people to neutralize and just accept everybody for their differences. Um, and he kind of, man, it's interesting his approach today. He kind of like shakes his head, and he's showing like almost like feeling this sense of hopelessness. Like
Yeah.
there's a huge chunk of people that want this peace, but there's also a huge chunk of people that are still
Yeah.
so blinded by and sickened by their own ego,
Yeah,
he
it's too
says.
bad. Well, we'll let it end off on that
So,
very happy note. I will talk to you in a little bit, guys.
okay,
Bye.
bye.